6.
6 what?
Copy.
5 seconds.
3, 2, 1.
Hey everybody, welcome to Subspace Chatter, which is basically a bunch of Star Trek people talking about Star Trek in all the detail you never knew you wanted to know. And today we have a special guest. I'm Lieutenant Commander Eve Zellick with the USS Lilith, and I'm going to be hosting today. And our special guest today is Mr. Nicholas Meyer, Director of Star Trek, man behind Star Trek, The Undiscovered Country, which is going to be a big point of discussion today, The Wrath of Khan, and I believe also he had a hand in Star Trek 4. So he's here with us today. Nicholas, welcome.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure.
And we'll go around the circle here. I'll start with John, who's beside me. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm John Gelby. I'm hailing from Glasgow in Scotland, and I'm a contributor to Subspace Chatter.
Marcelo.
Hi, I'm Marcelo Nostroza. I'm a writer, a podcaster, and a YouTuber.
Hi, I'm Melissa Nathan. I'm a stage manager in New York.
All right. So it's great to have you back again, Nicholas. I know we had you for the Wrath of Khan podcast, and there's a lot of interesting questions that have been kind of submitted ahead of time. I'm going to throw one out there right off the bat before we get into some of the more philosophical questions, because this is Star Trek. There's no philosophy here, none at all. The score for Star Trek 6 by Cliff Edelman, it's very different than the other 5 movie scores, and apparently you had a hand in arranging that with the composer, with Cliff Edelman. Can you tell us a bit about how that came out?
Well, sure, because I picked the composer and told him what I wanted. I come from a family of musicians. My grandfather was a violinist with the Boston Symphony. My mother was a concert pianist. My sister teaches violin here in Los Angeles. And so I have a fairly extensive musical background. I was a parlor pianist in my day. And so when it came time to do the music for Star Trek 6, I thought we had sort of worn out the rum-ti-tum of it all. It was interesting when you listen to the original Star Trek television theme by Alexander Courage or Courage. I don't know how he spelled his name. It was sort of traveling music and sort of theremin related. When George Lucas made Star Wars, he wanted a conventional orchestral score to sort of counterbalance the sci-fi of it all. And he got John Williams to do a sort of Korngold-esque. I think it's fair to say that what John Williams did was very Korngold-esque. And then when Jerry Goldsmith did the Star Trek, the motion picture, again, a very conventional, exhilarating march, and that just kind of caught on to all these other iterations of Star Wars or Star Trek. And by that time, when I was writing and directing 6, and I should say co-writing because I wrote the script with a partner, I wanted something different. And there was a long time before I got to Cliff Edelman because we were under a lot of budget constraints. I had originally, back in Star Trek 2, hired James Horner, who wrote a couple of movies for me, but then I couldn't afford him by the time we got to Star Trek 6. I certainly couldn't afford Jerry Goldsmith, so it was like looking for a new way to get somewhere. And when I met, I also thought for a time I was going to use Gustav Holst's The Planets, which I thought was a kind of cool idea. But Paramount wanted the rights to all of Gustav Holst in perpetuity. And I don't think the Holst estate was going to go along with that. So we were back to square one. And when I spoke to Cliff Eidelman, I said, look, I'm tired of this rum-ti-tum March stuff. This is a movie about a mysterious, warlike, brooding people. Give me something like the opening to Firebird of Stravinsky. And he went away, and a day later came back with a kind of Firebird-like opening. And I said, yes, keep going with that. And that's how that score got written.
Okay. The budget constraints you mentioned, I mean, we know that most of the original series show, the movies, even the first seasons of most of the Star Trek shows like Next Generation were fought under budget constraints. And John, I'm going to let you ask this question because you mentioned that Nicholas has said that art thrives under restrictions. So if you want to go ahead with that question.
Sure. Actually, this is a question that was put to me by a friend of mine, Paul Stevenson. But yeah, so he quotes you as saying that art thrives under restriction, which he agrees with. Limitations force you to be more resourceful and creative. You made Star Trek 2 and 6 under restrictions on money and time. Do you think that films would have turned out as well if you hadn't had, if you had had a larger budget and more time?
That's a really interesting question and probably unanswerable. I mean, if I'm being honest, there are moments in Star Trek 2 and certainly moments in Star Trek 6 where I can see where not having enough money, despite all the ingenuity that we were bringing to this, was a real hindrance to what it was we were trying to do. I'm sure everybody who has seen the scene in the Genesis cave from Star Trek II sort of says, oh, what this could have been, which is certainly what we, was supposed to be this really amazing place. And we did it the best we could with what we had. But there are times when definitely the money would help. But you could also argue the other way, for sure, that when you are forced to be clever or economical or find ways around how to skin the cat, that maybe you get stimulated. When I was writing and directing my first film, Time After Time, which was a movie about H.G. Wells going into modern times from 1893, I think, we had his London flat where he lived in Mornington Crescent, and we had that as a set. And then he goes into the future and he winds up in a museum exhibit devoted to him. So originally I thought, well, that's another set. And then I thought, hang on a minute, why don't we just take all the props and everything from his London flat and make that part of the exhibit? And we'll save some money, and it'll be an authentic H.G. Wells exhibit. And then I thought, hang on a minute, what if he forgot something in 1893 and it turns out, his glasses get blown off during the time travel trip, and he's wandering through his own exhibit and suddenly opens a desk drawer and finds his extra pair of glasses. So this is a perfect example, to my way of thinking, of art thriving on restrictions. I was out there trying to save money, and I wound up with something that seems pretty cool. or at least it seemed to me pretty cool. And certainly it seemed cool to the studio executives.
Marcelo, I'm not sure if you had a question.
Yeah, as a wannabe storyteller, I'm really interested to actually know your process when you take on a project that you really don't have any affection for or any prior knowledge of. And where I'm pulling that from is you infamously said in various interviews that when you were approached to do Star Trek, the only thing that you knew about it was, oh, is that the one with the pointy ears? So I'm fascinated with your ability to make something so
Alien.
alien. Thank you. So I'm interested with your ability to make something so thought-provoking and so entertaining with you not having any prior love for that material. I just wonder if you could go a little bit into how you approach that.
Well, I'll try. Hindsight is always 20/20, and a lot of times when people say to me when they've read one of my Sherlock Holmes novels or something, how did you do that? And I kind of go, duh, I don't know. I don't know. I don't remember or whatever. My notes are such a mess. I have, sort of notebooks that I write things down in. I don't know if anybody can see, but they just range on the same page to lines of dialogue or pick up dry cleaning. They just don't make up any. They're not quite coherent, let's say. When I was encouraged to meet with Harve Bennett, who was the producer of what was going to be Star Trek II, he showed me the movie, which I sort of looked at and I wasn't quite sure what I was seeing. Then he showed me some of the episodes and I looked at some of those and I thought, gosh, this does remind me of something vaguely that I did like. And I had to rack my brain for a while before I remembered these books that I read when I was about 13 years old by C.S. Forester, the guy who wrote The African Queen. He also wrote these novels about a captain in the Royal Navy during the Napoleonic Wars, Captain Horatio Hornblower, or he was Midshipman Hornblower, or he was Lieutenant Hornblower, but you follow him through the ranks. And he had all these adventures, and he had a girl in every port. And when you're 13, this is all starting kind of cool. And I thought, well, this is Star Trek in a way feels like Hornblower in outer space. And when I actually met Bill Shatner, he said, oh, that's what Gene, meaning Gene Roddenberry, said. So now I was beginning to find myself on some kind of solid ground. And I thought, okay, this is a movie about the Navy. This is about out in the Navy in outer space. I can do that. I didn't know about Star Trek, but I sure knew about Hornblower. And so when I revamped the uniforms and wrote the script, it was all about the Navy. And that's how I found my way into it. I should add in the same breath that not being a very analytical person, it was years before I noticed all the things about Star Trek that are really cool. Hornblower was a way in, but that was just the beginning. That wasn't the whole deal. The interracial cast, the idea that women could be officers, the idea that Russians could be, that all the things that were remarkable about the show, I totally missed when I was a kid and saw the man with pointy ears and just kept going. I didn't understand why they were wearing pajamas. I didn't understand anything. So yeah, it was all lost on me, and I spent the last 40 years trying to understand it.
If I could ask one follow-up question, do you
Sure.
are you of the belief that Starfleet within itself is a version of the military? Do you believe Starfleet to be a militaristic organization in some sense?
Well, I think it's more. I think Gene said it was like the Coast Guard. He was very leery of the military aspect of it, and I leaned into the military aspect a lot. If you want to call it the Coast Guard, then call it the Coast Guard. But I sort of was reworking it into my own image, into a way that I could understand it. And there are a lot of people who work on the Star Trek shows, of which there's like 50 gazillion of them, who, know everything that is canonically correct and this and that. And I ignored all that. I just made up what I wanted. And people said, well, Chekhov wasn't on the Enterprise when Khan was on the Enterprise. I go, yes, he was. He was just a few decks down. And like that.
Oh, that's great.
Melissa, do you have a question?
Not at the moment.
Okay, I'm going to throw this one out here, and then I've got a really nice heavy one from John because he got all philosophical. But the Shakespeare element. I mean, literature has come up multiple times in Star Trek since, and for the most part, when people think of starship captains and literature, the thought tendency amongst most fans, from what I've seen, tends to go to Picard because, of course, Patrick Stewart's got his British thespian experience and his Shakespeare experience. You don't usually think of Captain Kirk as a guy who reads a lot of books. He doesn't seem like the type. So how did the Shakespeare and particularly the Hamlet aspect come into this? And did the Klingon version of Hamlet come out first or the movie?
I didn't know there was a. I guess there is a Klingon. Yeah, the movie came first for sure. When I was working on Star Trek II, the writer who came to my mind was not exactly Shakespeare. It was Shakespeare at one remove, and that was Herman Melville, and that's Moby Dick. And I thought, well, this is, again, staying on the ocean. This is a sort of Moby Dick-like story with Khan as a kind of an Ahab. Was it not Moby Dick, Captain, took off thy leg? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's how Khan views Kirk, as the guy who marooned him on this planet, etc. So I helped myself to Melville. Melville himself was clearly very influenced by Shakespeare. When you read the book, it has a Shakespearean quality to the prose, and even calling it prose isn't quite right because it's sort of an iambic pentameter, mm-hmm. which is a poetic meter, anyway. And so when I was doing 6, I can't remember exactly how I got the idea that Chang was a Shakespeare fool, but I remembered that during World War II, or probably before, the Germans, the Nazis, kept insisting that you have never really experienced Shakespeare until you have heard him in the original German. So I just lifted that and substituted Klingon, and that's where I got that from. So it just, like Shakespeare's dialogue is better than mine, so why not use it? Because it's free. Again, ways to skin the cat. Why should I? He writes the best dialogue, so help yourself.
I have to admit that that part makes me think of how Chekhov says later in the movie when he finds the magnetic boot in Undiscovered Country, and he's like, "You remember Russian story of Cinderella?" Because everything to him was invented by the Russians.
Well, not only do the Russians claim a lot of stuff like that, but the Chinese, with justice, claim everything.
Yeah.
And they're probably right. Did you guys ever hear of a guy named Joseph Needham? Joseph Needham, I think, was either an Oxbridge or a Cambridge Don, who in the 1920s spent a fair amount of time in China. And he came away convinced that China invented everything. So when he got back to Oxford or Cambridge, Joseph Needham, Needham, he wrote an outline for a book that would encyclopedically prove that the Chinese invented everything. And he spent the rest of his life writing volume after volume after volume of an encyclopedia. You look up anything. And it isn't just like coal or paper money or gunpowder. It's like detective stories. They invented detective stories. In the 7th century, there was a Tang dynasty judge named Di Zhenjie who solved mysteries. And I know because I wound up writing a Judge D mystery for television years ago. And that's where I learned about Di Zhenjie. And you look up this guy, Joseph Needham. There's a book by Simon Winchester called The Man Who Loved China. And quite seriously, you can make that claim. The Chinese invented everything.
All right. So this one I'm going to throw over to John, and I kind of expanded on it because your question had me thinking, because I had to rewatch the movie because I haven't seen it in years. This movie gets very heavily into the politics of its time. We have like the Klingon moon being Chernobyl, essentially. The
Yes.
courtroom is the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of the Iron Curtain. And John had some questions about that. So John, I'm going to turn that one to you.
Okay, so the overall story of Star Trek 6 is the allegory for the fall of the Soviet Union, which was a big news item at the time. I was just interested to know if there was anything in the other elements of the plot, the characters, the dialogue, or anything that were much more personal to you.
Well, that's an interesting question. I kind of think that all the things I write are personal to me, but maybe not in the sort of direct line that I think you're suggesting. All works of art are products of the time in which they were created. You can look at, or you can listen to Mozart, and in 2 seconds you'll know this is late 18th century Middle European music. Doesn't just sound like Mozart, it sounds like late 18th century Middle European music. You can look at Renoir. He not only looks like Renoir, he looks like late 19th century French Impressionism. If I were to show you 4 movies that allegedly take place or are meant to take place, let's say in 1776, and one movie is made in 1920, and one movie is made in 1937, and one movie is made in 1992, and one movie is made in 2010, you would be able to tell within 5 minutes, maybe less, within 5 years, when each of these movies would be made. There would be 1,000 details that would give away when they're made. And some of them are fashion, some of them are technical, what's color, what's sound, and so forth, what kind of sound, but also what was happening at the time they were made. So the thematic, political, or philosophical elements that were on everybody's mind when the movie got made, which is probably one of the reasons why a given movie does get made. And certainly when Leonard Nimoy was trying to get me to figure out what was going to be Star Trek 6. And we were walking on a beach someplace, and he said, what if we make a movie about the wall coming down in outer space? Because the wall had just come down when we were having this conversation. And he said, "Who am I if I have no enemy to define me? What comes after?" And that was sort of all I needed to get going. I said, oh, great. We start with an intergalactic Chernobyl. The Klingon Empire is falling apart. They're all going to have to be, wait for it, illegal aliens. And then Kirk is going to wind up, hosting the Chancellor to a peace conference to arrange for the dispersion, the diaspora of the Klingons. But the Klingon ambassador is assassinated. Kirk has to take the fall, and then we have like a Klingon show trial, and then they get sentenced to a sand planet, which later got changed to an ice planet because the Paramount executive said he was bored with sand. So it's it'll be an ice planet, and it all sort of fell into place pretty fast. But it was definitely a movie about the time in which we were thinking it up, in which, is this the end of the Cold War? Is this the end of the Soviet Empire? There was even a Harvard philosopher, conservative philosopher, Francis Fukuyama, who suggested that we had reached the end of history. And so I used that line in the movie. Some people think we've reached the end of history. So yes, and because I was living through these times when this was being cooked up, it definitely felt personal to me.
On that same note, because you just said that, once Leonard Nimoy gave you the idea, it came together really quickly. With that being said, did you just essentially break it on the beach, and then after a couple weeks later, you went home and started writing it out, hammering it out, or did it take you some time to come up with all the story beats?
Oh, I co-wrote the movie.
Yeah.
I co-wrote the movie with a man no longer alive, sadly, Denny Martin Flynn, who had been my assistant. And I just thought Denny was brilliant. I just thought he was so smart and so creative. And Paramount was really looking to get going on this. And so I may be getting some of the details wrong, but Denny and I cooked up a story and said, how about this? And Leonard said yes, and Paramount said yes. And then I waited to be told to go write the script, and Denny and I, whatever. And nothing happened. And Leonard said, what's going on? And this and that. And then we found out that Paramount had hired 2 other guys to write the script.
Oh, wow.
And we thought, huh? And we couldn't understand that. But apparently they had a deal with these other screenwriters who were not as expensive as I was. And so they thought they could, skin the cat by hiring these guys. And it at the end, it sort of didn't work out. And they came back and, they had to cough up, and that's how we wound up writing the script. To the best of my recollection.
Yeah. I didn't
Melissa,
know that.
Do you have a question, or just chilling with us for a bit here?
Just chilling for right now.
Okay, I'm going to take a question that was from Kevin, who couldn't be with us today. And he said, I'm going to basically read what he's got here. So he says, this regards the interrogation of Valeris. It's been seen as an uncharacteristically violating moment for Spock, in that Spock is very angry when he uncovers the deception. And his question is, did Nimoy's performance go too far in the direction of anger, do you think? And how would you do the interrogation differently if you could?
Well, I can't fault, and I don't fault Leonard's performance. I always thought that the whole point was that that this was such a primal betrayal by Valeris of her mentor, as he saw it, that it had pushed this man or this Vulcan past his habitual self-control. Leonard said to me once, I never played Spock as a man who had no emotions. I always played him as a man struggling to keep his emotions in check, which is certainly a much more interesting dynamic. But that isn't the problem with the scene. The problem for me with the scene, and what I have come to regret, maybe it's the only thing I regret in the movies, or most of my movies, is that scene is waterboarding, and there's no way around it. That's torture. And it's not Leonard's acting. It's what's going on that, in retrospect, really troubles me.
How would you have wrote that scene differently?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay.
You know, got to get the information. The problem, as we learn with waterboarding, is not only is it inhumane and disgusting, but it doesn't guarantee that you're getting the right information anyway, because when you start torturing somebody, they'll tell you whatever the fuck.
So it's illogical.
It's illogical. That's very good. It's illogical. So if I had been, had another shot at it, or somebody, if Leonard had said to me, hang on, this feels like, of course, we didn't know about waterboarding at that point. We didn't know we were torturing people. And if somebody had said, doesn't this seem a little like torture? Then I would have had to say, okay, wait, let me figure out another way to do this. And I'm not about to figure it out, while I'm on camera in front of all you guys, but I'm conceding that it's a scene that makes me uncomfortable and that I regret.
Nick, just on the subject of Valeris, at some point earlier in the development of the story, it was meant to be Savick originally. Is that correct?
Yes. I thought that would be absolutely horrifying if it was Savick. But we couldn't get Kirstie Alley to do it.
That's specifically what I was going to ask you, because, like, as the story plays out, the betrayal is mostly personally felt by Spock, but had it been Savick, then surely it would be more felt by Kirk, because she would have turned over his log mentioning the death of David, and obviously David died in defense of her life. Do you think that would have actually even been believable?
Well, I thought it would have been cool, for sure. I mean, to have somebody in whom you have reposed complete confidence turn out to be, she's modeled Valeris more or less on Brunhilde in Wagner's The Ring. And she, she says to Kirk, as Brunhilde says to Wotan, did I misinterpret you?
She's just on that point as well, Nick. She's actually not in that scene, and it's only Kirk and Spock that are in that scene. This is a bit of a pedantic question, but she quotes back, "Let them die. Did I misunderstand you?" But that's a kind of just a conversation between Kirk and Spock. And obviously, it's a conspiracy movie, so you can just say, like, they were being
somebody
monitored.
was eavesdropping. Yeah,
someone was there. But I was curious if it was like if there was maybe an alternative version of events where other people were meant to be there at any point, and it just
it just slipped through our fingers, the way no one noticed on Star Trek II that Kirk and Khan never meet until the script was finished and we're, going to shoot the movie. And I said, well, so they're not going to meet, whatever. The thing is, writers make mistakes.
Yes,
I'm a big Arthur Conan Doyle fan. I assume everybody here has read Doyle. So you'll know what I'm talking about when I say, was Watson wounded at Maiwand in the arm, the shoulder, or in the leg? Why does he call Mrs. Hudson Mrs. Turner? And why does Watson's wife at one point refer to him as James? And Doyle had a very interesting answer to this. He said, no doubt I have made some blunders or serious blunders in keeping details straight. But he said, what matter so long as I hold my readers? And so, yes, you can say, well, Chekhov wasn't aboard when Khan was aboard, and who heard whatever. And I just thought, well, the fun part is when you try to explain this stuff. And that's what all the people who write about Holmes in scholarly journals is, that the truth is that the bullet passed from his leg into his shoulder when he was bent over. You know, it's like they have elaborate and I'll give you my favorite shot in Star Trek II is the shot where they are ripping up the gratings for running out the torpedoes. And I was talking with a friend of mine who's a rather well-known television writer. And I said, yes, this is a silly anachronism. And it is clearly left over from me watching Errol Flynn, The Seahawk, or Captain Blood. And I know it doesn't belong in a sci-fi movie, but I could not resist. It just was so cool. And he said, what do you mean, an anachronism? All the electricity was out. They had to pull it up by hand. There was no other. And this was my favorite exchange, because this was the audience meeting me halfway and supplanting with imagination why something had to be or look the way it was. You know, Shakespeare says, on your imaginary forces work. Think when we speak of horses that you see them planting their proud hoofs in the receiving earth, for 'tis your thoughts that now must deck our kings. And on your imaginary forces work, and you'll find a way around it. You know, the bullet went through his arm and it went to his leg, and the electricity was out at that point in that part of the Enterprise. You do the heavy lifting.
Along those lines, we just had a comment from somebody who's tuning in, Peter Stewart, and looks like he was looking at the details even more than you, John, because he goes, there was someone sitting in the briefing room shadows. All right. So he's just confirming what Nick has just said. Like, for every question, there is an answer if we're either looking hard enough or we imagine it.
I remember the whole quote now. I have never much striven for it, meaning accuracy of detail. What matter, so long as I hold my readers? Yes, okay.
No, sir.
I have a question. Since you said that you couldn't get Kirstie Alley for Saavik, but what about Robin Curtis, since she had already played Saavik after Kirstie Alley did?
You know, I can't remember what was going on, whether Robin was or wasn't available. I can't answer, and you've stumped me, because I don't remember.
I mean, it would have been a very different movie for a betrayal like that if it had been Saavik.
Probably.
Oh, Peter Stewart says she's really there, sitting behind Kirk. So I think you got your answer there, John.
Well, I think there's another way you could look at it, and that is that the proceedings of that meeting were doubtless being recorded.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, to get me wrong, it was just it was the only pedantic question I'll ask. It was just a curious. It was one of those things. I watched it when I was a kid, when I was like 11, 12 years old, and it's just always been in the back of my mind in all those years.
Yeah, I was like you too.
Yeah.
I would
And, it
I
looks
would
like
geek
you're-
out on stuff. Yeah.
We're in good company because our viewer is in the same company as we are. I mean, I brought up earlier in the chat about how General Chang's look to me looks like an amalgamation of original TV series Klingons and the weird sort of Discovery Klingons we saw. Like he looks like Christopher Plummer's character Chang looks like an amalgamation of that. Whereas all the other Klingons have the classic Klingon look. And I mean, that's what I notice. Like, or the
Well,
fact that they have
Chris
horn feet.
Chris Plummer said, don't bury me in makeup, is what he said. So we tried not to do that, because if you got Chris Plummer, the last thing you want to do is make it impossible for him to act.
Can I ask another one? I was just going to ask, what if any differences were there between directing Star Trek's 2 and 6? And I'm thinking in particular because the movies in between had been directed by principal cast members.
Well, I didn't pay much attention. I'm not I enjoy Trek, or I think I enjoy my Trek movies. But for example, I was offered to direct Star Trek 3. And I said, what is that about? And they said it's about bringing Spock back to life. And I said, resurrection? We're talking about resurrection? I don't know how to do resurrection. So I didn't do it. Star Trek 4, of which I wrote, I think I could say, the bulk of it. Again, it was not my idea. It was not my story. It was a story that Harv Bennett and Leonard Nimoy made up. And they hired writers to write it. And then they didn't like what they got, or the studio didn't like it. I don't know. And I was asked at the very sort of last minute to write a new version of the same story. I said, should I read the script you've got? And they said, no, don't read that. Just work from the story. And Harv Bennett said, let's split it up. I'll do the outer space parts at the beginning and the end, and you do the parts. I said, that's the remake of Time After Time, where they're back in San Francisco. I said, can't we at least go to another city? Why can't we go to Paris? And they said, well, the whales wouldn't fit in the Seine, or they had some reason why we were back in San Francisco. So I'm sorry, I've forgotten what the question was, but I'm sure that's the answer.
But the question was just asking the general difference between having
the difference
2 and 6.
The way you said it, I heard deference.
Sorry.
But I'm sure you mean, okay, difference. I guess I was to some degree more confident in what I was doing by the time I got around to 6. I was working with friends, people who had, that we all at this point got along and liked each other. And that with that like comes trust, I think, which doesn't always mean the movie's going to be better. Maybe it's better if people don't trust each other, if there's a lot more tension on the set. Doesn't necessarily matter. But my own experience was that I was glad to be where I was, glad to be what I was doing, and didn't feel that I was being second guessed by executives or other people. I had sort of made my bones doing the 2 and 4. And I had also learned a little bit how to work with the actors, in particular working with Bill, who could be a very good actor. He's, a lot of people make a lot of jokes about some of the stuff he's done, but he can be a very good actor. And you look at him in 2, you look at him in 6, he's good. And it all has to do with sort of toning him down. And sometimes if you just do it enough times, he will sort of stop, attitudinizing and then just be it. And that's when he gets really good, because he's an enormously gifted actor. Both he and Chris Plummer were in the Canadian Shakespeare Company at I think it was Ontario, and they both did Henry V. And I think Shatner was Chris's understudy. And when he did it completely different, everything that Chris had done. And Chris said, well, that guy's a star.
Do you find it incredibly difficult to write for certain actors or write for certain characters? When you go into a project, do you like to insert your voice primarily as a storyteller, or do you try to incorporate um the voice of the characters that you're writing for that you didn't necessarily create?
You learn to write for there are two aspects of writing in the movies. One is writing for the character. And in the case of Star Trek, these are not my characters. So you have to try to find your way in. And it got to the point where, Lieutenant Uhura would say, Nichelle Nichols would say, Uhura doesn't talk this way. And I would say, okay, how would you say this? And then I would go to work on what she would give me or what he would give me. I didn't have trouble with Kirk because Kirk was Hornblower, and so I sort of knew that. I didn't have trouble with Spock, which was sort of like writing Sherlock Holmes in a way. And Leonard didn't have any problem with that. But the other kind of writing is writing for the actor as opposed to writing for the character. And when Bill Shatner read my first draft of Star Trek II, he said, oh, this is terrible. This is a disaster. This is whatever. And I thought, oh, gosh. And then after he was trying to explain why this was bad, he left. And I said, well, I guess that's the end of this movie. And Harv Bennett said, not so fast, not so fast. And then proceeded to break down what Bill was talking about into what he was really trying to say, which boiled down to, I'm Captain Kirk, I'm the hero, I have to be the first man through the door. And once I understood that, I learned how to write for a star. And you can say this was his ego, or you can say this was him being protective of that character. But and it took me, like 24 hours to fix a few things and make him happy. But it literally was about, I have to be the first man through the door. And if a guy comes and delivers a message to me, I don't want an actor who towers over me and so forth. He was, sort of protecting himself and protecting his character.
When you mentioned writing for the actor and writing for the character, I believe actually Nichelle Nichols, didn't she ask for some of the lines to be changed or not given to her character because she felt uncomfortable with them for, various social reasons and things like that? I'm trying to be polite for the sake of YouTube here.
I think that's true. Brock Peters, to whom I gave a lot of the lines, I thought it was interesting to have an African American person as the traitor, because at that point everybody was depicting African American characters by and large as what Spike Lee called, what was it, the Society of Miraculous Negroes. There's a new movie with that name. And so these were people who were somehow being portrayed only at their best and never, with a degree of complexity. But I remembered Brock Peters from The Pawnbroker. Has everybody seen The Pawnbroker?
Nope.
Yeah.
No.
Oh dear.
But say your example anyway.
Yeah. We learned something today.
We learned a lot today.
Well, you learn to watch The Pawnbroker for sure. and Brock Peters plays a really bad guy, a very bad guy. And he is a pimp, and he's a bad dude and violent. And so I thought he'll be prepared to do this. And he did it. But the words he was saying were so repulsive to him that he couldn't get through the speech in one take. If you look at it in Star Trek VI, you will see that he is it happens in cuts. So one can understand why Nichelle would have been revolted as well.
Oh wow, that's so crazy that you had to cut up a speech because it makes sense, but wow, that's so crazy.
I think in a way that's a testament too to the skill and professionalism of the actor that
no question.
That he was willing to put that aside so he could bring what needed to be brought. Like that's actually pretty phenomenal, to be honest.
Well, actors, this is something that actors wrestle with all the time, is having to express sentiments that they can't help feeling reflect badly on them personally for whatever reason. It's a familiar dilemma. And you admire actors, I think we admire actors, who just go for it. A really handsome or beautiful actor who winds up playing thing where they're not handsome, where they're not beautiful, where they're not appearing at their ideal, or just somebody very violent in a movie who isn't particularly violent in real life. Whether it's Joe Pesci in Goodfellas or whatever, and they just do it. And by the way, some of them enjoy that opportunity to display an unsavory part of themselves and then go home and play with their kids.
I think Louise Fletcher was like that because she did Nurse Ratched and Kai Wynn, and she's known for doing these amazing villains that you can't help but love to hate. And
my experience with this was, I don't know if everybody here has seen I, Claudius, but Livia, portrayed by Siobhan Phillips, was just the most shit scary person I had ever seen in my life. Don't eat the figs. And I bumped into her at the Kensington tube station when I was living in London. I see there's Livia. Oh gosh. And I think she had a red coat on and a turban, and she looked pretty. I don't know. But I screwed my courage to the sticking place, and went up to her and I said, "Ms. Phillips, I was just a big fan, and Livia, you really are the scariest person I ever." And she said, "Oh, thank you so much." She was on her way to read for the blind. That's where she was on her way, to read for the blind. And I thought, oh, she's not really a bad person. She's really a nice person. She was just pretending. Oh.
That's a lot like Louise Fletcher, her story. When she got her first award, she actually signed her speech and sign language for her parents, who were both deaf. And this is a woman who we all learned to hate. And in real life, apparently she was an absolute sweetheart. It seems to be a trend.
Oh, she was. She was. I knew her a little bit. And she was quite lovely. It's just pretending.
I was going to say give Melissa a chance because she hasn't had much chance to ask questions.
I have a question for you, Melissa.
Yes.
Oh.
You are a stage manager. What shows have you stage managed? Are you stage managing?
Oh, well, I'm currently in between jobs, but I just spent 3 months in Sarasota, Florida, doing a production of Pictures from Home. So I travel all over the country freelancing. I'll be in Michigan in April. I'll be in Maine and then Michigan in the summer and the fall. So I'm all over the place.
Okay.
Did you have questions, Melissa?
I don't have a question. I just have a something, Nicholas, that you've probably heard a lot in the past year about how in Star Trek Picard season 3 with Amanda Plummer playing Vadic, there's one, I don't remember which episode it is, but one scene where she is in her big chair and she spins around, and it's so reminiscent of Christopher Plummer in Star Trek 6. And I just love that that little Easter egg.
I haven't seen the shot, but I get what you mean, and yes, that's an Easter egg, and it's almost Easter.
It is almost Easter.
I'm going to take one question from John because it's one that I think we all are thinking of. Just one second here. I'm trying to read off of a screen at the same time.
We've got about 5 minutes left, just so we know.
I'm going to throw this one out because I think it's something we'd all want to know. And I'll thank John for this. Is there anything interesting about this film, Star Trek 6, that nobody has ever asked you that you'd like to share?
Oh gosh, I'm really bad at that kind of question, and I can dilate on it. It's like when somebody says to me, "What's the best movie you saw last year?" And I go, I don't know what to say. But if you ask me, what did you think of X movie, then I can mouth off. Is there anything about Star Trek 6 that no one's ever asked me? I don't know, but I don't know that anybody had brought up the waterboarding before today. I bring it up. I will volunteer that if I'm able to, that this is a scene that I regret. But no one, I think, has said to me that, does it trouble you that this is torture? And even today, if I recall, you didn't quite phrase it that way. It was more about Spock's performance than what was going on. But
yeah,
anyway.
mostly because of trying to be careful with language for YouTube, because I mean, for those like Marcelo here who does a lot of more podcasting than I do, YouTube can be very picky if you don't word things a certain way. And
yes, YouTube can be very fickle that way.
Yeah. And because we're all in different countries, it's kind of a way to try and keep things like as open as we can for you to be able to share with us, but at the same time, we don't trigger YouTube.
Well, I get it. I hope I've answered most of it. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. Sorry. So when you finished the Undiscovered Country, did you have any idea that you would eventually be asked to come back to write for Star Trek? Like, how did you initially feel about being asked to contribute to the first season of Star Trek Discovery and the disaster that was?
Well, I was excited to be part of it. That's how I started. I was thrilled, and then it turned out to be more complicated than I imagined. I think one of the problems at this point with making a lot of shows and movies is that there's too many cooks in the kitchen.
Right.
It's impossible. And everybody thinks they have to make a critique, or else why are they being paid?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Would you ever consider releasing what you wrote for Star Trek Discovery, or do you have to ask?
Oh, there's no way I could release what I wrote.
Okay, okay, but if you wanted to, you would have to ask CBS, right? Before you actually do that.
I'd have to ask CBS. I'd have to ask Paramount. I'd have to ask, I don't know,
Okay.
everybody under the sun. And the
Okay.
answer would be no.
Okay. All right.
There is
Can I just
one
squeeze in
viewer-
one last? Sorry.
One
I was
last
gonna-
question. Yeah.
I was just going to
Oh.
quickly throw this one up because it's our viewer.
Sorry.
And this is something unknown to me. And if you can't say anything about it, it's understood. But Peter Stewart says, Nick, can you say anything about the SETI Alpha 5 miniseries?
Not yet.
Okay. All right, John, go ahead.
Oh, it was a very quick one. Just Star Trek 2, 4, or 6. Do you have a favorite?
No.
Okay.
If you want to take us home.
Yeah. So any last thoughts for us, Nicholas Meyer?
No, I'm out of time. I'm sorry.
Fair.
I'm sorry.
Totally
But thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed meeting all of you.
Thanks for coming back and for doing this. I mean, you were here with us for Wrath of Khan too, so thank you very much for this. This has been like exciting for all of us, I think. And
Okay, great.
it's
Great.
nice hearing like the inside scoop from the mind behind, in a sense. And Peter says, thank you, Nick. Looking forward to the Telegram from Hell.
Comes out at the end of August 27th, Sherlock Holmes and the Telegram from Hell. Yes, it's a very good book. I'm proud of it.
I'm looking forward to reading it.
I'm going to read
Thank
it.
you.
All right. Well, thank you again for coming on. And we know you're busy, you got things to do, but thank you again for coming. We really appreciate it. And I think this has been a lot of fun for all of us.
Good.
So yeah, no, we were really, really glad you could make it. And I want to thank those of us who were here today, like John, Melissa, Marcelo, and those like Kevin who couldn't make it but did submit questions. We do this podcast pretty much every Saturday at this time. I'm not sure what's on deck for next week, but if anyone knows, they can chime in, but I don't think it's been decided yet.
It's probably Generations for next week.
Generations?
I have to go, but you should all watch The Pawnbroker just to see.
We will.
I will, and
I
I'll
will.
also watch the Hornblower movie that you.
Oh, that's fun. That's a lot of fun. Pawnbroker is not so much fun, but
I'll watch it.
Yeah, you should. Take care.
Right. Live long and prosper.
All right,
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
I normally can do this. Wait a minute.
Bye, Nick.
Take
Bye.
care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
All right. And that kind of, I think, wraps up our show, unless anyone else here wants to throw something out before we go for the day. I know it's
do
Easter,
you guys want to promote what you do online or anything at all before we go?
Let's start with John.
I only do this at the moment, so.
Okay, Marcelo, we know you got ladles in a lot of pots. What do you got?
Yeah, if you wanna find all my ladles and all my pots, you can follow me on X. I am Creek Fanatic 88. On that profile, you'll find a link to my link tree that will open a door to all my podcasts and my 4 different YouTube channels.
Melissa?
I'm also on the forthcoming Rebel Transmissions podcast,
Me
to be
too.
determined when that will be out. And I have a couple of other ones from friends that have not necessarily been announced yet. But you can find me on pretty much all the socials. Melissa A. Nathan or Melissa N13, one of those.
All right. And for me, I've got a few things on the go. I mean, I am a sometime contributor to the Warp Factor Trek website. I usually actually do the proofreading, a lot of the proofreading for Dan. I obviously am here. I'm going to be on the upcoming Rebel Transmissions podcast, which sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun. And I also write music reviews for the website, The Rogers Review, which is run out of Washington, D.C. by a good Starfleet friend of mine, Dean Rogers. I review albums, interview musicians, things like that. And I'm working on getting my website up with all my published music arrangements, including what I've completed of the Star Trek catalog so far, which is not an easy task. And I mean, if socials, I go under Star Song Music, so easy enough to find that way. But I want to thank everyone for coming today. I hope I did a pretty good job hosting. I was a little nervous going into this.
Oh, you did great. You did great.
Wishing everyone a happy Easter. At least it's Easter here. I'm pretty sure it's Easter in the States too. I think the calendar is the same for this.
Yeah.
Tomorrow. I'm not sure across the pond if it's Easter as well. Okay.
Yeah.
Some of the holidays I know line up and some of them don't. Like Canadian and US Thanksgiving don't line up. But so happy Easter to everyone, and happy Easter to everybody out there. If you like what you saw today, hit the subscribe button. We're here every Saturday, and let us know what you thought. And live long and prosper.